Welcome to the NYU Steinhardt Jazz Interview Series, and tonight we'd like to welcome great saxophonist, composer, educator, Dave Liebman. So Dave, I've known you many years now, and in fact, I interviewed you about 7 years ago at Barnes & Noble that became part of a new book of interviews that that's coming out in a few days.
They transcribed all this stuff?
Yeah. So I want to start this interview by saying that when you write a book, as you know, you reread it, and edit it, and edit it, and edit it, you're sick of it. So I know your story so well.
You're sick of it.
I'm sick of it, no. But I have questions now because I know it so well. I just want to give a perspective that maybe the students here that are listening might learn from you, because you've been on the scene for a very, very long time, and you've been on the scene long before the experiences of most young musicians understand what a scene is. Right? So first of all, I want to start before you were like Toots Thielemans used to say, he was vaccinated by jazz by hearing a Louis Armstrong record. I know from your previous interview, you grew up in Brooklyn. You had some physical issues. You had polio as a child, but you were also in a Jewish community. It was a Jewish neighborhood?
Jewish Italian.
Jewish Italian.
50-50.
And which had typical 1950s scenario where probably had a TV or radio and a piano in the living room.
Or a mandolin in the
parlor, right? Yeah. And but you wanted to play music because you were hearing probably music from the street, but music from television and radio, which would have been pop music. One of the ones that stuck out for me in your early interview was Bill Haley and the Comets.
Rock Around the Clock.
So let's talk about that. Before we get into your connection with jazz, what was your connection with music?
That's a good question, and it was a saxophone. And specifically a tenor saxophone. I love rock and roll. I loved early rock and roll. I had Elvis on my wall, and I knew the words to every song. I had my own top 25. I used to trade 45s with in school with your friends and so forth. And I just loved the sound of the tenor. I didn't know anything about it, but of course that's coming from rhythm and blues. And the tenor particularly was really a big part of the soloing. When you had 8 bars or 16 bars, it was very often a tenor more than an alto. And of course to be replaced eventually in the 60s when the guitar became really ubiquitous. That was the end of the tenor, at least for that reason. And I liked the sound, and the early records, Bill Haley and Walking with Mr. Lee, Honky Tonk, Dwayne Eddy, Rebel Rouser.
Did you ever see any of those groups live?
I never saw them. I went to Alan Freed rock and roll show at the Brooklyn Paramount. It was like a screaming maniac mess. I couldn't see anything. But I was a real rock and roll fan, and way before jazz. And I don't know how did I volunteer to take lessons? Did I just say there was a piano in the home. Everybody took music lessons pretty much. You didn't do ballet, you did sports or music. And in my case, it was going to be music. And my mother very wisely said, not intending me to ever end up being a professional musician, that you can play whatever instrument you want, ostensibly tenor, but you need to take 2 years of piano first. And that's the best advice of,
But where did that come from? Was
she must have known something. She played a little piano. She would play spinning songs, stuff like that. And my father had Tchaikovsky and so Brahms, on LPs. I don't know where she got that from, but she must have just figured from a cultural standpoint, it's kind of necessary to know the piano. Not necessary, but how I put it. If you know the piano, you know more about music. Whether you're going to be a musician or not.
But at that point, you were playing classical written pieces.
Yeah, well, the piano was definitely Brahms and Bach and all that stuff. And then one day, after a year and a half, 2 years, I walked in and I said, I like to play an Elvis Presley tune, Love Me Tender. and sheet music, which in those days was a big deal, a beautiful picture and the chord symbols. And I took it to Mrs. Galper, and her name was Russian Jew, and she said, well, you play the right hand and the left hand. I said, but what are these other things? What are these things that say C? Said, I don't know. She didn't know what chord changes were. And finally, I said to my parents, I said, it's time for me to take the instrument I wanted in the first place. And then there was another barrier in those days. You had to take clarinet first. I don't know where they got this from. It still mystifies me, and it makes me not love the clarinet, probably for this reason. But
was it a Jewish thing?
No, it was that if you learn the clarinet, which is so much more difficult, you'll go to the saxophone and it'll be very easy. But the saxophone's easy in the first place, so I didn't quite get the reasoning. I wasn't being groomed to be a performing, wage earning at 13 years old musician. But it seemed like they were training me vocationally, kind of to pick up a trade, And by the time I was 13, I had the tenor and and the flute, and I was taking piano lessons again, but this time from pop music.
Now that brings up training, what they were training you for technically. In your last interview with me, you were saying that you had great respect for doctors because of your condition. And
well, there was an operation I had to have eventually, which would make it able me to walk without a brace. The brace now is from the 80s, but there was a long period when I did get rid of it. But you had to wait till your bones matured, which is 13 years old, 12 years old. I don't know how they told the difference, whatever. So it was always, when we went to the doctor, it was like my mother would assume a whole other personality. She was very forceful. She was principal high school, board of ed teacher, very, strong woman. And she'd be like this little meek lamb asking the doctor, well, when can David have, And I had to wait. Meanwhile, I had several operations, broke my leg a few times. It was a whole schlep. But of course, I really respected doctors because it seemed like they were, they were the most respected person in the room, and also doing good for mankind and all that stuff, which was, I'm not going to say I was altruistic at that point, but it was definitely part of the equation that you can help people and all that. So I began reading books. I remember a book I read, and I just refound a copy of it, Understanding Surgery. I knew exactly what they were doing. I knew about anesthesia. I got into it at 12, 13 years old, and then finally had this operation to finish the story, and then I could get rid of the brace, at least until the last couple of decades. But I wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to be an orthopedic doctor, just like those guys were, until I saw Coltrane. That was the epiphany. And
all right, we're going to get to Coltrane in a minute. So.
Putting a little water on the fire.
Yes. Before you saw Coltrane, there were some other things, because you were preparing for some sort of a career in music, and I'll just say this because the last interview you had said you were proud that you had 2 tuxedos, and so what was going on?
3 tuxedos.
Oh, sorry.
White, silver, and black.
Wow.
Well, somehow, where I took lessons after this classical thing, I went to this neighborhood school. It was called, the family's name was Bromley, Mr. and Mrs. Bromley and Eric Bromley. And Saturday mornings, they had combo walks, or the little combo books, you may remember those. Piano with Mr. Bromley, C7, arpeggios, blah, 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 not classical, but, not jazz, but, popular music, let's say. The mother ran the office, ran the business, and my first was, Nat Shapiro was my saxophone teacher. Anyway, she, I don't know where or how she did this, but she would call the hotels in the Catskill Mountains, which for those who don't know, it was a resort area about 100 miles north of New York, not really existing much anymore, but in those days it was quite a scene, and every place had a band. Bungalow Colony had a band, Concord had 3 bands, it was a big deal. And somehow she got us a gig, me and these 3 other guys who we stayed together for the next 5-6 years, and the first place was in South Fallsburg. This is a summer gig from July 1st to Labor Day. And you played every night dance music, and you did a show on the weekend. Comedian or singer would come in with charts, and and there was clarinet and flute and everything like that.
So this is when you're playing cha-chas and
mambo, merengue, Peabody. I mean, this is dances that nobody knows. Waltzes, of course, merengues. I mean, tangos. There was one tune for each genre. Hungarian Chardish on the clarinet, of course the flute, and. I was making money, 13 years old.
And you enjoyed it?
Yeah, I felt like a big shot. I joined the union, 13 years old. He said, my mother came, we went to 52nd Street, and she said, my son wants to join the union, he's working. He said, okay, son, let's see, C major scale, and I had the tenor. See, okay, he said, and play a melody for me. I played Lady as a Tramp, played like, I don't even think I got 8 bars, and he turned around and said, that'll be $120, ma'am. So I was now an official member of Local 802, and was, doing gigs on weekends. I mean, Saturday night, maybe certainly Sunday, not every night, every weekend, but I was a club date musician. That's what we called it then. General GB, general business gigs. GB, yeah.
So did you have the union guys show up at the events?
Yes, he did. He was collecting pension. I mean, I didn't even have a pound. 16 years old. I mean, it was a joke. But no, I felt like a real adult. I mean, I was working gigs, with a band. We had a whole routine. Grandmother Moses with anniversary waltz. The whole stuff you have to do, shtick, complete shtick. And of course I enjoyed it until I wanted to bomb the places I played in. But that's another story. But
you could tell that story.
Well, in the 60s, any kind of authority got, we didn't like it.
All right. All right, let me stop here now, because the things that you're talking about are exactly how most of everyone in this room and in the air got interested in music, just from their environment.
Yes.
Something happened to you around 1961, right?
Yeah. That's right.
So you
exactly.
took, and I'm just going to, put this in your perspective, because it's like we don't know what the future holds for us in the next 10 minutes or the next 5 years, right? And you think you're going to be a club date musician, bar mitzvah king, whatever.
Teacher on the side,
whatever. But you ended up going to Birdland, maybe, I think, to go see Bill Evans.
Well, the first time was with the older guys in the dance band. It wasn't called jazz band. Now, my high school was the biggest school in the world at that time. It was 6,000 kids in Lafayette High School in Brooklyn, Bensonhurst, heart of Bensonhurst. The dance band guy said, we're going to a club, jazz club called Birdland. I have no idea what they're talking about. It was okay with my parents because they knew Joey or Johnny or whatever. And we go, this is Christmas week of '61 when we were off of school. And it was Count Basie. I think there's a live record from that week, actually, Count Basie at Birdland. And then Jerry Mulligan with the non-ed, a tentet, with Brooke Meyer. I eventually learned
Zoot Sims, all those
I didn't know who anybody was.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. Of course, I always tell this cute story, but it's true. We had to order, you sat in the peanut gallery. It was the last row of seats, maybe 8, 10 seats, 2, 3 tables. And you got there early, and the first 8 to 10 young below age could stay there. They must have had some kind of deal. So we're sitting in the back, we take our assigned seats, and the woman comes over, and I never seen a woman dressed like this in my life. I never saw so much red velvet in my life, etc. This was a nightclub, 52nd and Broadway. And she said, Coca-Cola, okay, yes, can't drink. Coca-Cola, and she comes back and says, that'll be $1. And I look at her like she's from another planet, because in Brooklyn it's 5 cents. And I said, and I'm, now the older guys are like, they've been through this already, I'm going like, but it's only 5 cents in Brooklyn. And she says, you're not in Brooklyn anymore, son. and they're cracking up, and they're hitting me under the table like, be cool, you idiot. You're embarrassing us,
Carla Bley was a cigarette girl.
Yeah, she was, I know, in L.A., yeah. And cigarette, and the photographers with the big bulbs, come over, take you with your girlfriend, and then charge you $5 for a picture. It was the old, it was 50s, 50s, 60s culture. And then a couple months later, I said, I'm going myself. Now I know I'm a big shot. I know where Berlin is. I know what's going on. I know Pee Wee would seat you at the peanut gallery. And
so wait a minute. Let's talk about Basie for a second.
I don't remember anything except that I never saw so many guys 10 feet away, or not 10 feet away, maybe like here, 50 feet away, a band that sounded like that. I'm used to the high school big band, this is a joke, And here this band, again, I didn't know who, why, what, anything about it except the power of a big band, like, within a couple of meters or yards. It was unbelievable. And Mulligan, I don't remember much about it. It seemed to be very introverted. That's all I remember, compared to Basie.
Yeah.
It was definitely like that. So that was the first time in Berlin.
So, okay, now.
So now 2 months later, February, I go, and they call the placards, they were like this on the street. It said Bill Evans Trio. I had no idea who he was. and it had a picture of Coltrane playing soprano. It's a John Coltrane quintet. Now I knew that this is a guy playing soprano, which was, and, you know, I was reading Downbeat and starting to get names at least and records, and I was getting into it already. And you know, the soprano, I didn't know what the soprano was. This is a saxophone, looks like a clarinet. You know, so I said, oh, that's the guy who plays soprano with my date, Julie. So we go in, we sit in the peanut gallery. All I remember Bill Evans playing, and it was like he was in the corner of the room. He was twice this size, maybe. He was in the corner, like with his head down, which, you know, if you see Bill, that's the way he played. And he couldn't hear a note. And everybody was talking. It was a Saturday night, and it was like, you know, Saturday night in a nightclub in New York. It's tourists, who know, I don't know. Now they're quiet, but then they weren't. So, and I'm talking to the lady, and that's okay, boom. Next thing I know, this other group comes on, and whoever it is starts playing, and he's got Eric Dolphy with him, so now it's two saxophones. And he starts playing, and I'm saying, wait a minute, that sounds like me practicing, or trying to play. Because he's, you know, without getting too technical, you know, he's going for the altissimo, he's doing harmonics, you know, he's into that stage. It's the Vanguard live stage, so you know it by the music. With Train, you had to know every 4 to 6 months. He changed what he was working on. But that was, I definitely remember that, and thinking, that can't be the same instrument I have at home. How can that be the saxophone that's under my bed that I practice an hour a day? You know, big deal. So then he goes into this tune, of course, she says, oh, that's from The Sound of Music. I go, no, jazz guys don't play Julie Andrews, Do Re Mi, Rodgers and Hammerstein, you know, because I'm an idiot. What do I know, you know? And of course, it is my favorite thing, Tour de Force, of course. And all I remember, you know, what I remember for that night was like, I don't know what's going on, but there's something happening here. I must check this out. I must come back. I got to see this again. I got to hear it. I got to feel it. Not even by playing it. I mean, I was playing by ear then. I didn't know what I was doing. But just like, this is an instrument. Plus then the soprano on top of it, which was very exotic looking to me. I didn't know what it was. I mean, that was it. I mean, the Epiphany, we just passed the Church of the Epiphany. And whenever I hear that word, it's like, you know, that word connotates an awakening. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the awakening that day. You might have it retroactive or in the future. And but that was definitely my epiphany, that quote, that night, February of, you know, 62. Because whatever it was, I just couldn't turn away from it. You know, it's like in spiritual, you know, words, it's like they say, when you see the light, you can't turn away from it. It's on you, it's shining on you. That's up to you how you look. Do you look at it like that, or you look at it like that? That's your business. But once it appears, you can't negate it. You know.
So this is the major turning point in your life.
I would say so, yes.
And you knew it from probably not the minute you heard it, but
no, but
it was
subsequently, yeah.
But it opened up a whole other world that you never knew existed.
Absolutely, and nothing to do with this club date.
Yeah.
Little side love affair I had. It was a whole other world.
So, I mean, this is what we're talking for everybody. I think this can still happen now. I mean, think about
it. Happened to everybody in this room. It happens to all of us. I mean, I have a lecture on this, and it's called Seeing the Light, where, you know, you had something most likely that happened to you that you either, you know, you might have forgotten about, you might have put it on back burner for a while, you might wish not to discuss it or to think about it, but you can't be throughout life without not having something like that happen. I mean, that's life. And probably by the time you're 15 or 20, you probably happened at least once, if not more. It could be the death of a parent, it could be a disease, it could be seeing somebody that's representative of powerful forces, in my case. And mine had a couple of things, but everybody's got it. You know, it's just a matter of recognizing.
I mean, for me, when I first saw you, I was a young student at the University of Northern Iowa. And you came in, this is like 1980 something.
Oh, that's the Aebersold?
No, it was, you were a guest artist with the big band.
Who was the guy in charge?
Bob Washut.
Oh, Bob Washut, okay, yep.
And it's like, everybody's going, who's this guy? Because you had a different personality, different persona. It's like, you know, you're
rock and roll, bro.
Right? Everybody at Iowa was like
rock and roll.
You know, we're all happy, friendly, and then you come in. All right, you guys suck. You know, it was this tough. I mean, it was like New York tough, and it's like
I would prefer to say it was honest.
Yeah, honest, right? So it probably was honest.
The veneer was a little tough, yeah.
But, you know, that was the same jolt that you got from Coltrane, I think. It was like, who is this guy? Why is he here? Now let's hear him play. And it was something that I had never experienced. And I mean, you've done that over and over and over again with Aebersold, and I don't know, you're one of the leading educators that started this whole thing. So you've inspired a lot of people the same way that Coltrane inspired you, I think.
Thank you for the compliment.
But let's talk about more. How did this develop? Again, we can sit here and talk to Dave Liebman about, oh yeah, wasn't this great? And then I did this, and then I did this. But let's look at it from the other way. It's like you're just opening up these doors and saying, and then I discovered this, and I had no idea, and then I discovered this. So how did the train thing progress?
Well, I mean, I started trying to play those tunes. I mean, everything from Green Sleeves to Giant Steps. I mean, I was learning. Truth is, I really didn't know much about, this is now a musical thing. With train, you all know, you got divided up into beginning, middle, and late. And I really didn't know he was at Miles or Monk until I had started. I mean, I was into impressions, and PC and Naima, because those are the tunes he played in the clubs. Now, again, after that first time I saw him at every opportunity, so it was, I don't know, 15, 20 times in the next years, I don't know. But I started trying to play those tunes, but then somebody said to me, do you know this? And he put up the piano player, Mike Garson. He said, do you know this? And I said, what is it, blues? He said, yeah, it's a blues. He says, Blue Train, the 57, you don't know it? I said, no. He said, you got some homework to do, boy, you know. And then I realized, Miles and all his records on Prestige. I mean, that his universe was so large, even then, this is in the midst of his life, it was already a backlog. Because from 55 to 61, 62, he already had done a lot. I mean, if he had stopped in 62, we'd still be talking about him. You know, because he'd already made contributions, especially to the saxophone. So I tried to get with it, ask questions, and then we're back into this, what you're alluding to, which is jazz education. We didn't have a formal way of learning it. We didn't have a book that went from A to B to C, that was in order. We didn't talk the way I or you talk to them, nobody talked about music like that. And when you went up to the guys and asked them, they were like, go get me a drink, or worse.
So did you ever have enough nerve to talk to Coltrane?
No, but there was, one time it was 66, when he was with Pharaoh and Alice and, the late stuff. And I had already been hanging around the lofts. I was starting to get into, playing. There was one on 4th and Broadway, 4th Avenue, on 8th Street. There was on the west side, and then there was downtown and everything. And these lofts were like, you go in 3 in the morning, there'd be 50 people there. It was like just hanging and smoking, who knows what, like a real scene. And somehow Pharaoh knew me, or he recognized me. Because of the way I walked, people knew me, because nobody walked like I did. So, that was a distinction, I guess. Made it easy to spot me. So they're at the Vanguard, and the Vanguard, they're in the back around the kitchen, going on the way to the toilet, and I'm on my way to the toilet. Next thing I know, Pharaoh and Train are standing there. Pharaoh says, you play flute, don't you? I said, yeah. Yeah, I try, He said, show us something. And then he hands me the flute. Wow. Because they were playing bass clarinet, they were doing everything at the end. And, I said, I don't know what I said. I can't remember. It was like, time was starting to move at a different rate. Yeah. And I played a couple of notes, I don't know. And now I kind of receded. Suddenly I didn't have to go to the bathroom anymore. I receded quietly a few feet back, and then Train was surrounded by 2 or 3 people, maybe 4 people. He was standing against the wall, his head was down, no talking. Then somebody said, how's it going tonight, John? And he said, and he had a deep voice and everything. He said, well, it goes better at home than on the stand. And cats went, yeah, man, yeah. Everybody started signifying, yeah. It was John Coltrane. It's like the priest talking, boom, 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 like this, And that's as close as I got physically.
That reminds me of when I met you, or you worked with us in the 80s. It's like I would have never talked to you. I would have never had enough nerve to.
Well, I had nerve. I went up to Charles Lloyd and asked him if he gave lessons, and he said no at the half note. He said no, and pointedly said no, and then he took his glasses down and did one of these things. When cats do that, this one, then you're getting a second look. He gave me a long second look, and I don't know what he was looking for. And he said, you can come over tomorrow. You know where I live? I said, yeah, he lived right across from the Blue Note. Well, Blue Note wasn't there then, above the firehouse. I said, you're the firehouse above there. You got that 3rd floor Richard tune, that rhythm change tune, that's for your neighbor, right? I said, how do you know that, man? I said, I've been watching you. He said, come over tomorrow. And we had a year relationship. Every Sunday, not every Sunday, but I was there quite often, spend the whole day with him, drive him around, Tony Williams' drums to Slugs. I drove Keith Jarrett, T. Jeanette, and Cecil McBee to the Newport Festival, like a driver. They didn't even talk to me, You know, it's just had my girlfriend there and three, and you know, I had big cars then. It was like a Chevy. You know, you could fit everybody in here, and you know, it was cool. But we never talked. Rarely did we talk music. I mean, it was me hanging out with a live jazz musician who was, you know, getting famous at that time. It was just really when he was starting to pop up. And the lifestyle, and you know, and just you look at the furniture, look at what's that on the wall. You know, I took a note of everything because I was, you know, 20 years old, and I said, here's a chance to be inside it. These are not my peers. These are not my friends. This is the real deal. It's right in front of me is the real guy who's doing it, and sounding like Train and all that. And I mean, that was about as close as I got to any kind of formal instruction. So to go back to your original question, we did it by hook or crook. We did it by copying, looking over shoulders at the piano player, asking a question. And as I say, some people were more giving in their answers than others were. But we really had no formal way. And because of that, there are holes in my education. I mean, I can't arrange for big band. I mean, my penmanship is terrible. You know, things like that. Just we never had anybody say anything. You did everything on your own.
When you hung out with Charles Lloyd, were you just hanging out at his apartment, or
yes.
you brought your horn and you guys?
I would play once in a while, and then I think I got him to play. I don't know what I asked him, but he took the horn out. He said, "You're interested in this stuff," and then he played Olio Train solo, like right in front of me. I said, "Yeah, I want that." He said, "You don't need that." He said, "It's a different period." He said, "You play better than I did at your age." He said, "How old are you again?" I said, 20, but then maybe 21. He said, "You don't need that. That's old shit." He said, you know. So he completely misled me for years,
wow.
Not on purpose, but he made me think, and this is important because here we're in a school situation, he made me think that I didn't have to know the past. Because he said it to me. And because he said it, I just idolized him so much, and he was so dramatic. And he was a very, giving kind of guy, talkative. He had a real personality, as you can tell the way he plays, real personality. And I'm not going to say he dissuaded me from learning about bebop, but he definitely did encourage me to go into it like I would now, or you would to any of them. We'd say, you got to take care of business, you got to walk before you run, cha-cha-cha, that's why you're paying 60 grand a year, we're going to show it to you. And he said, you don't need it. A couple blocks from here. And that was pretty far out. And didn't mislead me, it just, he didn't say that the past was important.
So, we don't hear much about Charles Lloyd's past. Did he ever talk about it?
School teacher. He was teaching for a while, like Cannonball did. Yeah.
Oh.
He was like a closet intellectual, very bright. But he also was smart enough to get into the hippie thing. He realized what was going on. He could see there was a sea change in culture. He found a way to finesse the whole situation with using early train as his torch. I mean, he really comes out of early train, and then he graced it and he fluffed it up, and of course he played flute and everything like that. And his tunes were catchy and everything. I mean, over the last few years I've seen, in fact, we just got an email from his wife today. He was a little ill, but he's doing good, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know what his education was. It's a good question, I don't know.
Well, I know a little bit. Do you know, here's a trivia question for you. Who was the first pianist to record Forest Flower with Charles Lloyd?
Well, Keith. No, before Keith. You want to tell me somebody before Keith?
It was Don Friedman.
Oh, I didn't know that.
On a record called Discovery. And I asked Don.
Oh, Discovery, that's right. But Forest Flower's on Discovery?
Yeah,
okay.
I believe so.
That's Columbia Discovery.
Yeah, that was his first record.
That's about the time I knew him.
And I said, Don, how'd you get on that record? He says, well, I went to college with Charles Lloyd in California, UCLA.
UCLA, so that's where Chico Hamilton, the whole thing comes together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, but that's about all I know.
He had a hit tune there, that's for sure.
So that was interesting. I mean, we talk about Miles crossing over into the fusion pop market, but Charles Lloyd,
he might be the most responsible for it because he had this hit, and it's all because of the major 7 thing at the end. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very basic what it is. It's catchy and easy to grasp, and Keith, I mean, he's burning. But he caught the wave and he knew what to do with it, and he really played it to the hilt. And, he had a lot of success, and then he kind of quit the whole thing for a while and just went into retreat in the West Coast. I don't know, he bought land and played with the Bee Gees. I don't know. He just disappeared. And then what's his name got him back, Petrucciani. He got him back into action.
Now, you were in a kind of a pop group called 10 Wheel Drive.
Yeah.
So what was that about?
Well, this is the Chicago, Tower of Power. I might be missing one or two. Blood, Sweat, and Tears, of course, and this band. And it had a singer who was, Janis Joplin-ish, great blues singer, good-looking chick. 5 horns, rock, bass drums, guitar, piano, rhythm section. 2 guys who wrote music. The guy who wrote the music studied with Stephen Sondheim. This is deep. And he wrote very sophisticated music within this rock thing, and the guitar player wrote the words. And actually the music was pretty good, it was good, and I was the main soloist. The other guys were all section stuff. I played, we did a blues every night, blah, blah, blah. And what this was, this whole thing about fusion, kind of important that the students know the real thing, the real deal here. But, jazz was in bad shape in the late 60s. Even the Vanguard closed for February or something like that. It was, times were tough. It's because rock and roll completely eclipsed everything else for about 3 or 4 years. Monterey, Jimi Hendrix, Woodstock, this whole late 60s pretty much, And jazz was, not in great shape. And guys like us coming up, it didn't appear that we were going to work with Horace Silver. It didn't appear that we were going to do our own bands like everybody does now. That wasn't on the map then. And then suddenly this horn thing came out. I can't know who the first horn band was that, made this like a kind of a genre with 3, 4, 5 horns. I don't mean just a saxophone solo, but I mean, section, playing sectional stuff, and then somebody playing funky on top of it, and you got a lead singer and you got a band. And that was seemingly the way that we could do something kind of artistically, jazz-wise, because it was jazz improvisation over a rock beat in the end, is what it was. And this whole thing opened like a light for a lot of guys. Oh, we can do this, and then that led to more studio work and blah, blah, blah. And for me, the main thing about it was that it was on salary. We got $125 a week. You either rehearsed or played a gig every day. And that meant that I don't have to school teach anymore. So that was goodbye to being a school teacher.
So prior to being a school teacher, I believe you were a graduate of New York University.
I was, of Uptown Division, Arts and Letters. Yes, I was. In American history. Yeah. Yep.
And so that was something that you were interested, or was it for your family?
Well, going to school in those days was not it was not a requirement. A lot of people did not go to college. If this was the same audience, we were talking 1960, 65, how many of you going to go to college or will go to college? You got like 3 or 4 hands. It was not that you had to do it. You went into a trade and you did what you did. And so with this in mind, the people would, sorry, what were you asking?
Why'd you go into
the horn band?
Did your family want you?
Oh, no, yeah. Well, in my case, my parents, being school teachers, actually supervisors, principals, so forth, I was definitely going to college. That was on the map. And I started as a music major at Queens College. And I knew I had to stay in New York because I knew enough to know that jazz at that point, if I'm doing jazz, it's going to be New York City. It was and still is like that, the most population of musicians. And with that in mind, I said, okay, this club day thing is going to end because I was starting to really hate it. I had worn thin. What am I going to do? And my parents knew about the business. You become a substitute teacher, you go in per diem, you do 2 days a week, or up to you what you do, and you make enough to live on. And, at the end of college, they said, you're on your own now, and we'll help you here and there, but you got to do something. So I got the requisite credits and so forth, and went Monday mornings. I get a call 6:30 in the morning, show up in the Bronx, Staten Island, or whatever, babes, what substitute teachers do, you're a babysitter. You're just keeping the time. Sometimes a guy would come, one time I went to school in the Bronx, guy says to me, principal says to me, you're going to have class so-and-so in room so-and-so. He said, make sure they don't jump out the window. Hello? What? I said, you'll see. And, by the end of the day, I was like this.
Wow.
I was against the door like this, like 3 o'clock, come on, please. And then I'm thinking, if I take Coltrane records, they'll love me. They didn't know who Coltrane was. They couldn't give a damn who Coltrane was. This is. Then on the other hand, I had some kindergarten classes, and I loved it. The little kids were great. But this was a way of making a living, and that's why school served that purpose. And by the time I realized that I really didn't need to have gone to school, it was my senior year, and I figured I'm going to finish this and get that degree. So it served that function. But I will say one thing, in defense, and in my parents, in their really right decision. Most of the guys I know, my peers, didn't go to school. They didn't go to, if they went to jazz school, and that was rare in those days. But they didn't go to college. And as much as you might think what you learn, you forget the day after. And these people here that are going to graduate, and you say, well, what about school? Was it? Yeah, it was cool. Mainly I met a lot of people, and I played like that. But let me tell you something, 10 or 15 years, you start not remembering what you learned, but that you learned. And that affected your personality And our job is to get across something to somebody. And if you ain't got nothing to get across, it's going to be ain't nobody listening either. And I think what separated me from the pack in a lot of ways was that I had a liberal arts, American history is a liberal arts, I had a liberal arts education. It's beyond that I could spell and write. It was that I understood something I didn't know that at 22 years old. And then I'm saying that to a bunch of students, but you know, it clicks in later that you had an education, and that does raise the bar a little bit at least. Yeah.
Well, okay, I want to continue on here. Again, we don't know what's going to happen to you because you've got this gig with 10-wheel drive. You were substitute teacher, you know.
Well, Elvin.
Now, but let's talk about the loft scene, because it's important, because New York City now is one of the most expensive. The Village, East Village, is one of the most expensive places.
Brooklyn.
Let's talk about 1967, 68.
Yeah. Well, the lofts were well known for artists. These lofts are industrial spaces that are transformed. That's a big word. Into living spaces, you know, with a hot plate, a toilet, there's a hole in the ground. I mean, and a fire hazard beyond belief, etc. So, I mean, light bulbs, you know, I mean, it was.
But they were vacant.
But they were big. People went home at 5 o'clock. You had all night to play. You had the weekends. You had holidays. I lived 4 lofts in 10 years. For whatever reason, didn't work out. It wasn't no good. I was too much noise. They were too much noise. I moved 4 times in the 70s, and the main thing was that. When the first one I had was on 19th Street, and it ended up being me, Dave Holland, Chick Corea in that building. That's another story how that happened, Miles, etc. But there we had a wealth of music coming out of there 20 hours a day in that case. So now they used to press the shirts. This is all textile business in Midtown, and you know they'd be done 4:30, 5 o'clock, and you could start burning out. But in some lofts you could play, they didn't care. They even liked it. But it was a place to really try things, and also artists liked it because they could put canvases around. They had room. Photographers liked it because the windows were 10-foot windows, and the poets and people like that because they could be private. And, you know, you weren't living in a commercial area because the lofts were in Soho, in Chelsea, downtown in Bowery. Nobody lived there except you. you and a couple other maniacs that lived there in that building. So it was a training ground, and I had 24-hour policy. I had a piano, I had drums, I had vibes, I had a bass. Maybe I had a bass for a while, I don't remember. But I would lower the key I was on the 3rd floor. A bell would ring, cats would be there, I'd lower the key down, they come up, we play, 3, 4 in the morning, go to Chinatown, eat something, you know, or Ratners on Delancey Street, you could get free bread, you know, and then we would sleep a couple hours and go back and play. And all of us would try to make a living. Bartender, cats would drive a taxi, I was doing the substitute teaching, but we were meeting to play, and we were playing completely free jazz, completely Ascension. I mean, nobody even said a word about a chord change or anything. It was a style that, at least that I was involved in the late 60s, was the free jazz movement, really from Train, because at the end that's what Train did, and that's what we did, because of Train, you know. So the loft scene was very important for our
What was the rent like?
It was $150 for a month when I started. I bought it, there was something called key money. You had to buy it from the people who lived there beforehand because they had, you know, maybe put in a hot plate or a refrigerator, whatever the improvements that they did. So they charge you, this was off the books, because the landlord you had a lease with, he wasn't supposed to know about this. But that first loft was, I think I paid $2,500 to the guys who made tie-dye shirts before me. And then I sold it to Brecker for $5,000. And then I took another loft and sold it to Bill Evans for $8,000. And, you know, we had, you know, everybody wanted to live in the loft. And, you know, there was cash around, you could afford to do it. But I had my budget down to the penny, monthly budget. And I knew how much I had to teach, which was 2 days a week, Monday and Tuesday, and then take the tie off and go crazy till Sunday night. And Monday be ready to teach again. I was eating rice and vegetables. I was in a macrobiotic diet. All the chick was, Dave was, we were all, you know, keeping expenses down. But you could do it in New York at that time. You could do it. You could get by, and you could play or write or paint or do whatever you wanted to do. And this is the biggest problem now is what's happened to artists have been completely shuttled out of the system, you know, as we know.
Now, I think you were probably one of the ringleaders of this conglomeration, because didn't you form a nonprofit?
Yeah, I did it a couple times. Yeah. Free Life Communication, Bob Berg's title. Very good. Bob Berg sitting right there. See him now. Well, me and Bob Moses and I were very close. He was my first real teacher in this music. He got into it when he was 10 years old. You know, his parents were involved in it. Lived in Manhattan, you know, etc. And, we were playing in the lofts, and we were doing great and making tapes and everything, and, smoking a joint and drinking hot iced, drinking tea, and, trying to be, hip and in Indian influence and yoga, doing everything, Scientology, everything comes in, and we're trying to do something, and finally, we're looking for like, when are you going to get your break? When are you going to play for people? Because I've started to look and say, we're playing for each other, man. This is not cool. So then we went out and did churches. We did museums. $1 admission, $3 admission. And we got a grant from the State Council of the Arts, $5,000, and we were able to rent a place, and we had a nice floor with pillows and a grand piano for $1 a year, a grant that for the arts, because we were an avant-garde group and so forth. And of course, the main lesson was there were a lot of young guys. We had 40, 50 members at one point, but we were 22, 23 years old, and hardly the kind of guys that could run an organization in the right way. I mean, I was pretty good with business, but not enough to keep this going. So eventually I got the gig with Elvin, and that put me into another category. But that whole period, this free life communication we called it free life because it was free jazz, and because the hippie stuff was life, and communication because that was the bottom line of what this music is about, or art is about, is communicating. And we had, very deep discussions about the title, and we had a budget, and we had money and dues. And of course it faded as guys started to get gigs. I mean, Mike and Randy went with Horace Silver, Gene went with Elvin to eventually get me in there, Chick and Dave were with Miles. This was all the late 60s, early 70s. But again, that was a period of incubation, which without, I don't know if I'd be sitting here musically.
Now, did that period start to open up because you were saying this was 60s was a terrible time for jazz?
Yes.
And by the time Elvin Jones called you, was it getting better?
By the 70s, it was getting better because rock and roll had kind of stretched its place to the limit. Now, we can go into discussion about pop music, but Stevie Wonder, Earth, Wind and Fire, but that's an artistic thing. I mean, the rock thing, look, when Jimmy died, that took the wind out of the sails. Like Train in a way. Mm-hmm. He was the cat, everybody loved him. Everybody knew he was beyond the normal thing. It was beyond blues, it was beyond rock. He was really stretching for things, and everybody's waiting for the collaboration with him and Miles, and there was a lot of excitement in the air, and then he splits, and that's the end of that. And
did you ever meet him?
No. I saw them at the Fillmore. I saw the band, the Gypsies, that New Year's Eve, that concert. But he was a big hero, and that kind of, and then Altamont, and the Rolling Stone. The things got a little nasty by 69, 70. So that became, in its own way, without us touching it. Jazz was still, in the corner, but this slowly was evaporating, this height of rock and roll, of the pop thing. And so we found a way to get back in it, but again, we had to do it by ourselves to do concerts because we couldn't, we weren't going to play the Village Vanguard yet. We weren't ready. Nobody knew who we were. There was no publicity about us. It was just us being together because we liked playing with each other. We liked hanging out, and that was the premise, really. And then it finally started to turn into us joining the system. Elvin Jones, Miles Davis. You had to sign up. In the end, if you wanted to keep going, you had to sign up.
And that gave you relevance to pursue the rest.
You got a life.
Right.
Now you have a life.
Yeah. So there were probably scores of guys that you knew that never got those breaks.
I'm a very fortunate person, believe me. Miles and Elvin, are you kidding? And Pete LaRocca.
Yeah.
I had a 5-year period of these guys. I had to pinch myself. I still think about it in retrospect of the opportunity that I had that only a couple other people did, and I'm forever grateful for that. I was good, but I wasn't that good. I was okay. In my estimation, I was okay. It wasn't like new guy in the block. Somebody like Grossman was at 14 years old. He could already play. It's because his brother told him what to do. Because his brother taught at Berkeley. He said, "Don't come out of the basement until you play that solo of Birds." And the kid didn't play basketball. He didn't do anything. That's all he did. I wasn't like that. I was more different kind of vibe, and I got lucky. I definitely got lucky.
Well, we're going to table this conversation in a little bit, but you've lived this life, and you've continued to move forward and pursue a broad range of, I don't know, how many recordings have you done by now?
Over 500.
Yeah. And and you're not done yet. I don't think you're done.
I got more coming out this year than I ever did.
Yeah. So what words of advice do you have for these young
Well, I hate to put water on the flames again, but this is my new mantra. Just was at the Manhattan School of Music today and talking to a kid. Double major. Double major. Have something in your back pocket. I can't tell you. You do not want to have it affect your art by what you may have to do to make a living. If you're really serious about it, you want your art to be your art. Now you're in school, you don't know what that is yet. You know, you're learning, you're getting there. You know, it's when you get out of school in the next 5 years, that's when it comes together or it doesn't. And you got to have a chance to do that. And you may have to do other things in order to make a living because it's not $125 a month anymore.
But that's what you did too with teaching?
Well, we did.
Right.
But the pressure's much more on these people now. Much more. It's financial. It's money. Mm-hmm. It's the money they owe, the money they borrowed. It's the built infrastructure. You know, it's tough. It's tough being a young fledgling wannabe artist at this point in any trade. I mean, and the internet has done two things: complete yin and yang. It's made that you could be sitting in the jungle in Thailand and you can see John Coltrane, no problem. And if you like it, you can even sit there and put it back and keep playing with it. On the other hand, it completely killed the business. The music business is almost completely done. I mean, it's just a shadow of what it used to be. They don't know what it used to be. You had a record deal, you had tour support, you got actually paid for publishing, you got paid to do a record, and you didn't play for free. All things that everybody's doing now as the norm were, you know, in our time, at least you got paid. At least you had publishing, you joined BMI and you got something. Mm-hmm. You know, this is very hard. So, but the other point of double major, besides being on, you know, I'm talking on a very practical level, you go like, oh, well, you know, what about the art? Good to have something else going on up here. It helps this. Because this and this, in the end, is all you. And you're having something that goes on here that you like and that you're interested in, you know, it may not be the love of your life like it is to play the saxophone or whatever, but if you got something like that, it's going to inspire you in a different way. Because once you get deep into anything, everything's the same when you get deep into it. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like Thomas Blake, you know, he said, you can see the universe in a grain of sand. I mean, it's about you doing it, it ain't about the subject. And you know, it's like when I went to Elvin and said, I couldn't play I'm a Fool to Want You anymore because I didn't feel it. And then he said, so it's the song's fault. You know, you're blaming the song, you know, I mean, what are you talking about? So, I mean, in this case, I think if you have something else going on in your head that interests you to some degree, that inspires you to some degree, and you put that together with the music, I think you have more to say to people. Mm-hmm. I think actually it works better than just the music alone. And then, of course, the vocational aspects, as I mentioned.
You ever regret following the path that you've chosen?
Yes, I did. In 1980, 81, I had really broke my leg pretty badly. I got hepatitis. I was a mess. And I took the law school exams. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get into NYU. But I got into Delphi, I got into Baruch. And because I had a pretty good record in high school, and also I had life experience, which at that point, even then they used to think, oh, you've been around the world, you've done. And I really considered being a lawyer. Pete LaRocca was a lawyer, so I had a model, actually. They all dissuaded me from doing it.
Really? To
the man. They said, you think you're going to change the world, don't you? I said, yeah. They said, you think you're Mr. History and you know everything, and you're going to teach them about the history? And yeah. I said, it ain't going to be like that. You're going to sell out, you're going to know your guy is guilty, and you're still going to defend him. I said, you know, now I'm being very short with this, but the point was that this you're going to help the world stuff. Cats told me, no, you're going to have to pay a lot of dues to do that stuff. And I tell you, I had my check ready on May 30th. Deadline was midnight for deposit to Baruch. And I just said, okay, I'm not doing it. And that's when education raised its head. I needed to find something. I'll be honest with you, the music is great, but unless you're Coltrane or Mozart, you should start thinking about something else, to be honest. And I know pretty well what that means, because I know those guys. I mean, the quality of the music. That doesn't mean you can't play and have a good time and have a life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you're going to put 70, 80 years in the planet down, I mean, you want to have some effect on something, I would think. Or, you know, or be a great bank robber, but something. I mean, do something. And I always felt that the music was very egocentric. It's me, 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 me. Okay, it's a group and all that, very independent, democracy at work, true. But as the years, by the time I got to my mid-30s, it's really a midlife crisis in a way. I said, like, is playing the Village Vanguard the end of my life? Is that it? I mean, I've done everything already. What now? And teaching saved me. Because up till then, I would teach a lesson here and there. I had no formal way of doing it. But through Aebersold, through band, through, variety of things, I saw that, you know what? If I help one kid understand what this really is about, I made a contribution. And that got me out of the mess of like, would I ever regret doing it? That made me say, I will go down as a great teacher, which is more important. Because unless you're unless you're one of those guys, you better figure something out. I mean, it's pretty dramatic what I'm saying, but that's how I feel about it.
Well, I'd like to say that I believe that it's been the world is a better place with you here.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
And you've certainly inspired me and everybody I know.
Appreciate
So,
it. Thank you.
Dave Liebman, everybody.